Missing football? Of course you are. Well, have no fear. We've got you covered all offseason with our new series, NFL Injury Deep Dives. We're talking about major players in the NFL coming off major injuries. And in this episode, we're talking about one of the best defensive players in the entire league. And last time we saw him, he was walking off the field and has not returned since. Welcome, football fans, to another edition of IDP Plus. And today, we've got another episode of our NFL Injury Deep Dive series. I am one of your hosts here, the DGen Doc. But more importantly, I am joined by my co-host, my brother in degeneracy, Mr. Derek Bennett, a.k.a. Professor Locks. How we doing tonight, brother?
Not too bad. What are we? Almost 3 weeks from draft time. So we're almost back into NFL swing.
It is starting to creep up into our mind a little bit more, just as we like it. There is no off season in the great NFL, especially when you love and miss ball like we do. We've had a couple things go on since our last one. So this is episode number 2 of this series, and you guessed it by the title. We are talking about none other than Mr. Dexter Lawrence, Mr. Sexy Dexy. Today we're going over to the defensive side. We did our Stephon Diggs episode about a week ago, so make sure you check that out if you're interested. Hey, Stephon Diggs, Patriots' new wide receiver 1. How's he going to look coming off his ACL tear? Since we jumped on here, a couple things happened in the NFL, with this quote-unquote offseason. Anything that caught your eye this past couple of weeks?
Yeah, a couple things, but I want to start by asking you a question about the new quarterbacks in town for your New York Football Giants. We got Russ coming in. We got famous Jameis coming in. Hey, draft season's right around the corner. Are they going to bring in Shadur, one of those other guys? I mean,
look, all I know is right now we definitely probably have the most eclectic quarterback room with famous Jameis, Mr. Russell Wilson, Let's Ride, and Tommy DeVito. Yes, eating those W's better than dubs. Snatching those, those crab legs back in his Florida State days. But I guess now he's a Giant, so I got to put my Gator bias aside. And
Russ might be a good influence on Jameis.
I think he'd be a great influence, right? So, no, I mean, look, going in the situation with Jameis, I think Russell Wilson provides a much higher floor for us to win games, But obviously, this is not the biggest takeaway. It's not the franchise answer. No doubt. I think we were texting about it. My first initial response was, shit, that probably means no Cam Ward, right? We're not going to go all out for Cam Ward, which sounds like the Titans are pretty locked in there now. Yep. Thankfully, no Aaron Rodgers, which I knew you as a Steelers fan might have a little bit of different fate there. I think if we pair this room with a younger quarterback, I'm a big Jackson Dart kind of guy. I like him, but not in the first round, right? I don't want to kind of, obviously, definitely not at 3.
You definitely don't take him at 3.
Yeah,
I don't even sitting at 21. I don't mind that.
Yeah,
but it'll be interesting to see how quarterback hungry some of the other teams around the NFL get, and see if they can jump back up a little higher in that first round. Did you know this is the first? I can't remember the last time this has happened. Every team in the NFL has their first round draft pick. We don't have any duplicates going into the draft right now. Yeah.
Are you serious? I can't remember the last time that's happened too. I mean, a long time. Sounds like some people, decided to stop selling the farm for 1 year. So, a la the Rams finally have their pick. I was going
to say, between the Rams and then the Stafford trade and the Deshaun Watson thing with the Browns, those guys, I mean.
Yeah, 49ers were big into that, So, that is a nice stat there. I like that poll. But, you asked about Shadur. I don't think he's the guy. Definitely not at 3. Definitely not at 3. Ideal situation, Travis Hunter at 3, and we can, in the second round, get Jackson Dart, something like that. After Dart, I don't really think Milroe or Tyler Shuck or whatever. I don't think any of those guys
That's
are
an
really.
interesting one. If he was, 2-3 years younger,
Yeah,
he would be a better
he's
prospect, but
old, man.
he's
I'm not.
he's a
None of those
little bit
guys get
on the
me
older
excited.
side. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean Milroe is a great player, but he's just not an NFL caliber quarterback in my mind.
yeah,
So I think really, I think you either go Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, who's ever there.
sure.
I think it's going to be Hunter based on a lot of the projections and things like that. But
Yep.
I don't think you can pass up on Travis Hunter for like. I just don't think Shadur is a surefire thing,
Yeah,
and we just don't need that right now in New York. We don't need to reach for another quarterback that's not going to pan out, a la Daniel Jones.
sure.
So. But yeah, man, that's the Giants talk. What about you? What anything that pops out to you as far as it's been hopping around in the.
Yeah, I mean, just today, as we're recording this, April 3rd,
Yep,
Joe Milton gets traded down to the Big D.
saw that.
I don't
Yeah,
know necessarily what Jerry Jones's whole thought process is bringing in these super athletic dudes on that haven't necessarily panned out to be backup quarterbacks because he just did
project.
this 2 or 3 years ago with Trey Lance. Joe
Yep,
Milton looked really, really good, and I think it was the
last game of the season.
last game
I
of the
think.
season,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But
No,
why are we? I'm not
project's doing it
exactly sure why
nicely.
we're trading a 5th-round pick when we just paid Dak Prescott $500 million or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
He's making $60 million a year, so
yeah.
I don't fully understand that.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot going on in Dallas that I don't understand, which is a good thing because I don't mind if they suck. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, no, I do think Milton's interesting. He definitely looked better on the field than I thought he was. Coming out
yeah,
of Tennessee, I never thought he was that good of a quarterback. Even he lost the job to McNamara at
at
Michigan.
Michigan, yeah.
Then he came into Tennessee. He lost to a Pitt
Hell of an
team.
arm, but yeah, I
He
mean,
could throw the ball a million miles, but like you look at him in the big games, he just really didn't deliver.
right,
He was, the drop off from him, from Hendon Hooker to him was pretty alarming.
no doubt.
So I think that speaks volumes. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but like, I mean, Dak, I know he's coming off the hamstring, and that happened so long ago. We may or may not talk about this offseason, but
Sure,
it is interesting. But I think season wise, it's probably going to have little to no impact.
agreed.
But all right, man, you ready to talk a little
Let's talk
sexy
sexy
Dexy?
Dexy. Let's talk about some defensive guys.
Some
Really
defensive
smart.
guys. So I will set this up, and then I will, send this over to the expert. Really, Derek's just the more the nerd of the two of us, so I'll let him handle some of the
I'll
more
take
nerdy
that.
stuff. But so Dexter Lawrence, he dislocated his elbow against the Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving Day. One of those Thanksgiving Day games there against Dallas. Look, Sexy Dexy was having a great year, one of the most dominant defensive tackles in the game. He had 9 sacks in the first 7 games. For a little while, he was leading the league there. One of the premier players. So why don't we start with first? What is an elbow dislocation? How does it happen? Why don't you just give us a little background about this, and I'll go ahead and pull up your slide if you're ready for it.
Yeah, go ahead. So, elbow dislocation. Anytime we talk about dislocation, we generally have bones where they're supposed to be, right? Our bones should line up in a certain orientation compared to other bones. With dislocations, that orientation has now been disrupted and the bones are not sitting where they need to be. So, in this case, with the elbow, we really have 3 main bones of the elbow. It's kind of like our arm knee, and a lot of times we tend to hear about a lot more knee injuries when it comes to the NFL. So if we think about our elbow, kind of sort of like our knee, that upper arm bone, the humerus, basically sits down into that little groove of the ulna, basically the second arm bone that you can kind of see there on the slide. We also have the radius on the other side. Doesn't necessarily um, give us a ton of
Ability.
stability at
Yeah.
the elbow, nearly as much as the ulna. So the ulna has that nice big groove at the back side of it that really, as we extend the elbow, comes into like a little hole, a little bit of a divot, and gives the elbow quite a bit of stability. So when it comes to elbow dislocations, since we have all 3 bones there, there's a lot of things that can kind of dislocate and disrupt that orientation of those bones. So we don't exactly know how uh, Dexter Lawrence dislocated his elbow, but it's one of these 5 or 6 different types. Usually we're going to see anterior or posterior dislocations probably more frequently, but this can happen for a number of things. Most people day to day, if they dislocate their elbow, they probably have fallen. They stretch their arm out to try to break that fall, and all of a sudden that olecranon process, that little U of the ulna, basically gets shoved backwards, and that's where you're
Mhm.
kind of seeing that in the top left hand corner. In football, we have guys landing on guys, making tackles, and it's really hard to say exactly which direction those arm bones really went.
Yep.
Like I said, most likely anterior or posterior, but it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's great. There we go, class. Now you know what elbow dislocation is, right? So again, you're just the joint got moved out of place, right? And
Yep.
how does it happen? Football. So a couple background things here, a couple NFL specific things. This is a relatively rare injury in the
Yeah.
NFL. It only makes up about 5% of all upper extremity injuries, which most injuries in the NFL are lower extremity. So it's not a lot, right? I think I was looking at a study. There was like 82 in like a 10-year stretch from '05 to
Yeah.
2014. Most common amongst defensive linemen and linebackers,
Hmm.
guys that are using their arms a lot. But the mechanisms of injury, like Derek said, for us civilian folk, us normal folks, usually you fall on your outstretched hand, you land on it, and then your elbow kind of pops out, right? Kind of like, Jedi Broom's injury a little bit. Did not dislocate, thankfully. But if you're seeing that, if you're Final Four time, just something relevant,
Yep.
right? That is typically how it could happen. Something like that, awkward fall, right? But in
Exactly.
the NFL, it's usually due to either you're tackling somebody or you're being tackled, right? Sometimes it could be a direct blow, to the elbow in whatever position, and it's strong enough it knocks the bone out of place, right? Typically, you don't see that in day to day life because you don't have 300-pound giant, very strong men
Hmm.
running into each other like, but basically bowling balls. So, it's a little bit interesting, a little bit of a rare one. So we wanted to talk about it, and because Sexy Dexy's such a great player. So let's talk recovery timelines. I'll actually handle this one. So
Yeah,
it's
go for it.
all gonna be about, are you having surgery or not? Are you doing conservative treatment or do you require surgical intervention? Right. So, and that all depends on. We'll talk about some rehab factors here in a little bit, but how complicated it is. If it's a simple dislocation, first you're going to want to go ahead and get it reduced or get it put back in place, right? Because the more
Mhm.
longer that hangs out, the more you're
Yeah,
risking
I
other.
believe they did that like during the game, like on the
Yes.
sideline. Obviously, he didn't want to go back in because we don't know exactly what else could have been
Yeah.
torn or injured throughout that process. But
Yeah, typically, like you said, right? They'll put it back in place, and then they'll go get an X-ray and kind of get an assessment of where
yep.
that. They'll do some functional tests, like can you extend and bend all the way, stuff like that. So if you don't require surgery, which it's almost like half these guys don't. It just depends on how
Hmm.
complex it is and what ligament, if the ligaments are torn or not.
Right.
It's only about a 5 to 6 week recovery, or 5 to 8 week, excuse me, recovery timeline for return to play, which is pretty
Hmm.
damn quick,
It
right?
is.
We're talking like 2 months. But if a surgical route, it's closer to the 3 to 4 months is typically what you'll see. For them to really get back. So if it occurs in the season, it can be season ending. Which in this case, was the back half of the season, so he was shut down for the year.
Well, not only was it the back half of the season, but the Giants kind of sucked.
Okay, all right. We could have just gone out our day without saying that. It's 2025. We are looking
We're
ahead, my
moving
good
on.
sir.
That's
We're
right.
moving on. All right, new things. The Daniel Jones era is done.
Brighter day
Uh,
coming.
I hope. Who knows? Who knows? Jameis Winston may be my quarterback. So, all right. So before we move on to the back half, we've kind of laid out some of the groundwork here. Now we're going to kind of talk things like, how much time is he going to have? What's the rehab going to look like? And on, some similar cases. And then what are we doing with Dexter Lawrence this season from either a
Yeah.
fantasy perspective or what to expect from maybe the Giants overall, because he's such a big piece of this team. But before we do that, I got to tell you about one of the promos we got going on here. Promo code IDP plus 2025. IDP 2025, all one word. If you head on over to idpplus.com, that gets you 50% off any subscription on
Ooh,
idpplus.com. You want to check out
nice
idpplus.com
savings.
because we are one of the only sites that got you covered with football 365 all year long, 24/7. We're talking football because we love it. So if you love football like us, you're going to want to head over to idpplus.com. Also, you're on IDP Plus YouTube page. Make sure if you haven't, like, subscribe, turn on notifications because, again, we're talking ball all the time. Things you want to know. I know you miss football because we miss football. So make sure you don't miss any of the action over here. And then finally, best part of the off season, the Fantasy Football Expo. Go to the fantasyfootballexpo.com and get your tickets today. All right, my friend. So I'm going to tell us really quick how much recovery timeline he has. And then we
Mhm.
were going to talk about what are some factors that are going to affect this rehab. What are we looking at here? And then we'll talk about some similar cases and things, so forth, so on and so
Sure.
forth. So as of today, or as of the injury date to week 1 is typically how I'll do this, right? The amount of rehab time Dexter Lawrence has from November 28th when he injured it to September 4th when we have opening weekend, 9 months and 1 week. So we just talked about, even in the worst case, or in most cases, like, that wasn't anything super crazy, 3
Yep.
to 4 months, right? So
Right.
clearly, he's going to be just fine. I mean, we talked about this. We mentioned it at the, offline, but he did some in the Pro Bowl. Like,
Yeah.
he's
He was a
probably
big spiker and tug
tug
of
of war or
war,
some
right?
shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you so? All right, let's talk this. Bring it to football. Do you think he's ready for OTAs?
I do. Yeah. I mean, from a timeline standpoint, um, he should be good. Usually this is something like 3 to 4 months. If we're going that conservative route, and in this case we're assuming that, yeah, he should be good.
Cool. All right. So why don't you tell us, like, what are some things we're looking for rehab recovery, maybe from a broader sense? Like, what are some things that
Yeah.
are going to affect this, slow this down, maybe speed it up? And then,
Yep.
is there any marks we're trying to hit? Really, what's kind of the goals there?
Yeah, I mean, with elbows, it's a little bit more straightforward than most joints. Initially, we just want to make sure we have full range motion. Can we fully extend? Can we fully flex and bend? And then wrist wise, because again, we have 3 bones. A couple of those really determine how much we can move our wrist side to side.
Yep.
Um, that's the first thing. We got to get full range of motion back, both flexing and extending the elbow, as well as kind of twisting our wrist back and forth.
Yep.
But from there, it's really just strengthening kind of the 4 major muscle groups around that elbow. So we have elbow flexors, biceps, brachialis, those kind of things, triceps on the backside to extend our elbows. But then just on the other side, of our elbow closer to our wrist, we have our like wrist and finger flexors and extensors to allow us to bend our wrist and fingers. So assuming all of those are gaining strength, and he just did the tug of war and the big spike, in order to hold on to a rope, you got to have some pretty good strength. Um,
Yeah.
and especially with that pulling type of motion,
Yep.
those elbow flexors should be pretty strong. Now with Dexter Lawrence being a defensive lineman, like those pushing muscles, those triceps, we got to have those rock solid.
Yep.
And from a healing standpoint, a timeline standpoint, he should have all the time in the world to get all of those muscles good and strong. We don't have as many of like return to sport tests and things
Yeah.
like we talked about last week with Stephon Diggs. That we talked about a few things that we would be looking for. Elbow wise, we really don't have more specific numbers that we're looking for.
Yeah.
More so, what were you doing before? Are we doing that right? And in this case, like I said, timeline wise, he should have all the time in the world to get those muscles good and strong.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you, man. Yeah. I mean, a lot more straightforward than the ACL Stephon Diggs
Oh
stuff,
yeah,
with this rehab. So that's good. But I do want to throw out a couple similar cases to kind of highlight, what happens when it's pretty straightforward and what happens when it's not so straightforward,
yep,
right? So first one, your boy, Ohio State linebacker Tommy Eichenberg, back in
absolute dog.
2024 season. I guess it was 2023
Yes.
2023 season, right? So on what was that, November 3rd, he injured his elbow against Rutgers. He did
Mhm.
not finish the end of that game. He wound up dislocating his elbow, right?
Yep.
And then he sat out the next 2 games. But what he was not going to do was miss the game against Michigan. So just 21 days, 3 weeks later, he put a brace on and said, you know what, I'm going to suck it up and do it. And he had
Yep.
7 tackles and he played a pretty solid game. Now, of course, it wasn't enough to defeat the Michigan Wolverines, but it is to highlight, he's obviously had a fairly simple dislocation. He still beat the recovery timeline by at least a couple weeks. So he's still an
Yep.
absolute stud to gut
No
through
doubt.
that and play. That is not something you will normally see. But that just kind of shows you like sometimes it's not super complicated if we just,
Correct.
kind of put that joint back in place as
And
long as there's no.
especially elbows, like we can put some pretty wicked elbow braces.
Yeah.
They're restraining, right? We
Yeah.
don't want them to re-dislocate. The brace helps with that. It also helps with your play as well a little bit. But in that case, like you said, he still had a pretty good game. Maybe not
Yeah.
quite up to the play that we expect out of Tommy Eichenberg, but with the dislocated elbow 2 or 3 weeks before, fully understandable.
Yeah, no, and the position kind of helps there, right?
True.
You're a linebacker. You're not really trying to handle the ball much, right?
Yep.
But obviously the ability to push off defenders and things like that will be a
Yep.
bit limited in things. But yeah, like you said, the brace definitely help. But just kind of a situation where I mean, shit. Yeah, 3 weeks later. That's kind of one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum. I want to take us back to 2014. Tyler Eifert, old tight end there, from Notre Dame, that was a high draft pick for the Bengals. In
Mhm.
his 2014 season, he dislocated his elbow on a nasty, brutal. Yeah, we're not going to show it. If you're interested in that kind of gruesome stuff, it's on Google. Google it. But yeah, he did not only just tear his elbow, but he also tore his brachialis, which is what we call your beer drinking muscle. It helps to flex the elbow up towards your mouth in the case of maybe you're drinking a Guinness or something like that. So, but that is where these dislocations really become nasty. He wound up missing the whole year because it's the other structures around the elbow. If they get damaged, if there's a fracture to one of the bones, if they're hopefully not an artery or nerve, that's where it can become really dangerous, or muscles or something like that. That's where you see these like really long, drawn out, complicated things. And that's what really helps determine, okay, what are we really dealing with? By all accounts, by him participating in the Pro Bowl games, Dexter Lawrence, it was enough damage that to the ligaments that there was surgery needed, but it wasn't anything crazy where there was multiple surgeries or anything like that. I mean, again, he
Yep.
was back kind of in the Pro Bowl games, doing things that someone with a dislocated elbow can't do.
Yep.
So, just some kind of examples of different cases of what you could see with this. So, again, in a simple and most like 90%, 95% of cases, not going to be missing more than 4 months typically. But if you do, it's when you kind of have those associated structures where it could get really complex and kind of take
Mhm.
a while.
Mhm.
All right. Final takeaway for Dexter Lawrence. Season outlook, fantasy outlook. Where are you at? Are you buying Dexter Lawrence? Are you selling him? How confident are you that he can get back to being the player he was last season?
Extremely confident. I mean, he's one of the best defensive linemen in the league by far. I think would you say ranking wise, he's third
Yeah, so
in
I mean, there's not
on the
many
D
rankings
line
right
right
now,
now.
but yeah. Right now, they have him as a third defensive lineman in IDP fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, he deserves all of that credit, and yeah, I'm drafting him very very high.
Yeah, no, and I'm just gonna echo your sentiments and maybe even add a little extra layer as far as
Oh,
Dexter
here comes
Lawrence.
the Giants bias. All right, here we go.
Listen. First of all, most dominant defensive tackle in the league the past 2-3 years. When Aaron Donald, retired, the crown immediately got passed to Dexter Lawrence. Absolute stud. Now, look, I think it's a PFF or one of these has this ranking of him being third defensive lineman. Okay, let's talk about this for a second. All right, Dexter Lawrence. He played
12
12
games.
games this year. He finished with 44 total tackles and 9 sacks. All right, what about the guy they have ranked above him? Okay, Jalen Carter, one of the up and coming, and the guy, definitely coming on strong in his
Super
second
Bowl
year.
champ.
He finished the year with playing 16 games, only 42 tackles, and half the sacks, 4.5 sacks. And Quinnen Williams, the guy they have ranked second, only 37 tackles and 6 sacks in 16 games. So he played 4 or less games, and he had more tackles and almost double the sacks as these guys. Put some respect on Dexter Lawrence's name. He should be the first defensive tackle drafted. That's how confident I am in Sexy Dexy getting back to the dominant defensive lineman. that he is. So
can't take anything from that. I'm not gonna lie.
But no, look, from an injury medical perspective, I think we're both echoing no
Yeah,
real
he'll
concerns,
be good.
right? He's 27 years old. He'll be getting closer. He turns 28 in November. Other than that, a little bit he's not old, but he's getting to kind of the middle part of his career, right? That other than that, no real concerns at all. I think Dexter Lawrence is going to be back, and they're going to need him for that Giants defense. So all right, my friend. I think that was it. Nice, quick, tidy episode here. That's how we want to do it. We kind of wanted to be around that 2025 range
Yep.
to get you this information that you need. It's the offseason. It's a perfect time to look at some of these deep dives because typically, guy gets injured. Okay, he's out for the year, and then you either forget about it or you're like, I don't really understand what's happening. But is he back next year, or am I just going to fade him automatically?
Right.
And that's where we come in and tell you, hey, this is what's actually going on. So, hey, if you're enjoying this, give us a shout out, right? Like, subscribe, let us know.
Yep. If you have any guys that you want us to talk about fantasy wise, your favorite team wise, just guys that you have grown to love throughout the league, shoot us a message. We'd love to hammer down some more of these.
Yeah, either you can comment on the video or you can follow, Derek over on X at Professor_Lock2 or myself at the DGen Doc. You can shoot us a message over there. Say, hey, would love to know more about this guy, and we'll absolutely oblige. Yep. Now, Derek did mention the NFL draft less than a month away. So next couple weeks, that's what we're going to be focusing on. We are going to do a NFL draft kind of rookies injury. It'll be a little bit longer, but we won't go as in depth on each injury. We're going to talk through some of the biggest injuries. Hey, should you be worried about this guy? I know my dynasty players and things like that. You've got to kind of know pretty quickly. So we'll focus on NFL draft rookie injuries. Then we'll do an NFL draft props show, giving you some actionable information, some bets you're going to want to tail. And then we'll likely do a reaction show after that. So next couple weeks, we're going to be talking about the draft because that's the hot, sexy topic. But after that, we'll get back to these injury series. So that gives you plenty of time to reach out and figure out who you want us to talk about. All right, my friend, you got anything for the good people before we get on out of here?
Hopefully y'all survived April Fool's Day. Other than that, I got nothing.
Hopefully the next time I talk to you all, my Florida Gators are the national champions of basketball, of the basketball world. So we'll see Final Four this weekend and then hopefully Natty on Monday. So we will see. Other than that, folks, hey, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, whenever you're watching this. From Professor Locks and the DGen Doc over here on IDP Plus, we are out of here.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.